Host of Forged in Fire.
Kyle Mann.
I'm J. Warner Wallace.
Kira Davis.
It's Ben Adams.
Hey, this is Dave Baker.
Carrie Pomeroli.
This is Mike Reiner.
This is Ethan Nicole.
This is Liam Morgan.
It's Graham Parker, the 5th GP, and this is why you should never.
How I got suckered in.
I'm so embarrassed that I'm here.
You're wasting your time. You got better things to do.
Never listen.
Those darling, yummy Reverend and the Reprobate.
Welcome to the Reverend and the Reprobate, a show where two best buds interview people they have no business talking to. My name is Lucas Pinkert. I'm an actual Reverend, and here with me, as never before seen, is a friend of mine, one of the hosts of the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu podcast, also a member of the FTX group. If you don't know what that is, go check out the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu podcast, the JP to Nell podcast, to learn about the experiential leadership training, field training exercises. It's the fabulous, the talented, the very tall enough to turn our lights on and off without a stool. It's Josh Strasburger. What's going on, man?
Hi, guys. It's good to be here.
Is it?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty excited.
Are you?
I'm only minimally palm sweaty.
Yeah.
But, it's cool.
So this is your first episode, like doing like interview with somebody.
Yes.
Yeah. So what'd you think before because everybody knows we record this at the end.
Right.
Right. So did you have fun?
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And he was a delight to talk to.
He
and super easy to interview. So
yeah. He being J. Warner Wallace, the new book, The Truth in True Crime, just came out from Zondervan Publishing. We talk a little bit about his career as a cold case detective. We get into a lot about the thing about this book is he outlines 15 different things, like attributes that we as people need to be successful in order for us to flourish, how those things were effective markers of like people's identity and things through 15 different true crime stories, which is what the book is about, which is very, very cool. But we hit on a number of those things to kind of talk about, like, what are some things that we could be doing, not just to be more successful as Christians, more successful as, pastors or whatever, but just successful as individual humans.
Right.
And then in controlled rowdiness, we get into some pretty sporty stuff about
deep questions.
Yeah, about energy drinks.
Yes.
we go deep about energy drinks.
Caffeine intake.
Yeah, and the Bluey theme song.
My kids are older.
Did you guys ever watch Bluey?
Yes, and my 7-year-old will still watch it, and if it's on, we'll all watch it.
So season 3 of Bluey, I think it's like almost at the end. There's 50 something episodes because they're like 7 to 10 minutes, right? Are you like me? Like when my wife watches a show like that's like right now her laundry show is The Crown.
Okay.
And
my wife watches that.
Yeah. So and for those of you who don't know, we just had baby number 2 has just arrived. He's like 3 weeks old.
Congrats.
Thank you very much. And so like while she's, she puts him down, she'll throw the AirPods in, turn on the Apple TV while she's kind of, folding laundry or whatever.
Right.
And she'll watch The Crown, and I can pop in and out of that one, but it's not a big deal to me. If I come home and they've watched like 2 episodes of Bluey and I'm like behind, I get a little upset. That is like, for whatever reason, like this kid's cartoon, I'm like, hold on, what's happening with the Healer family? And why is there a for sale sign in their yard?
Right.
Why are like all of these? Yeah, like why are all of these things happening? And I don't know what it is. She's like, oh well, Levi was having a little trouble getting down for naps, so
I had to get
now that I've got the one that is fully dependent on me, like bringing the 2-year-old up to watch an episode of Bluey before nap time, kind of chilling him out.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the spoiler, by the way.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
We don't have streaming, so we are behind. We just received disc 3 on disc.
Oh,
to
nice.
be able to watch them. Now they've watched through them multiple times.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're watching the ones on disc, you actually get. This has nothing to do with the interview, by the way.
No, not at all.
You actually get some of the stuff that is not shown on the streaming services.
Correct. And there's like the actual like Australian cut of it on some of the episodes too. Yeah.
Really?
I haven't watched any, but the kids, like even my older boys, will like laugh at some of the stuff and
the Aussie cut of it.
Yeah.
All right, that's pretty cool. They made an episode available called like Baby Dad or Dad Baby, something like that, where banned it, and the only reason that I watched it is because Kirsten and I were talking about things because she's no longer pregnant.
Right.
How much things have changed and yada yada. And she's like, well, I don't bump into stuff anymore. So this one is an episode that was not released on streaming. And so Bluey, like the official Bluey channel, made it available for free on YouTube. You can watch this 8 minutes long. It's pretty hysterical. The like crux of the episode is that Bandit, the dad, finds a papoose, right, a little baby carrier, and he was like, oh, this is what we used to carry you around when you were babies. And so Banjo, the younger daughter, hops in it. And then he's like, oh, it wouldn't be that hard to be pregnant. And so he pretends like he's a pregnant mom. So that's the game they decide to play, is that he's a pregnant mom the whole time. And the wife follows him around, and anytime he makes a derogatory comment, she hits him with a rolled up newspaper. So there's several levels to
layers
this.
in this here.
But so much of it is these are the conversations that I had. And the thing that got me the most about it was when Kirsten was pregnant, especially in the middle of the third trimester, when she's getting up and she's and kind of holding her back when she's getting up from the ground. Our oldest, who was 18, 19 months old at the time, would watch her kind of waddle to get up and move around. And he would wait to get up, and then he would look at me, and he would hold his back and be like, making
so
all the
hard
same
getting
noises
up.
and holding his back whenever he's walking around. She's like, you're going to need to deal with your son.
Get a rolled up newspaper.
Yep, that's exactly right. So before we hop into the interview, we got a couple of minutes. Tell everybody real quick, give us a high level, what is the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu podcast that you're a part of, that ministry that you're a part of, if people want to go check it out or want to support that ministry?
So Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu, it's me and 3 other guys. Well, 4, because Lucas is part of it.
Barely. I'm a producer of the show.
He's hosted numerous episodes. But we started it just, I guess, Reader's Digest version, trying to bring...
What's Reader's Digest?
I'm old. A short version.
The TLDR version. That's what it is. That's what it is.
But we just wanted to bring 2 things that we love together. And it started as a monthly to 4 to 6 week event in person where we teach a seminar for jiu-jitsu. You get some live roles, and then we also get to share a testimony about Jesus in there. The thought behind that is there's a lot of people that we're friends with, we're close with, that train jiu-jitsu, but may or may not have a church or may not ever go to a church. But to bring these things together was just laid upon our heart in an effort to spread the gospel. It branched out from that. We now have a weekly podcast every Tuesday. We still do the in-person events. We have merch, and that's just where we're at right now.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, make sure that you check it out. Links to Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu are going to be in the show notes, as well as everything that J. Warner Wallace has going on. Hang around for the interview, and without any further ado, J. Warner Wallace.
Let's go.
Good. On today's Sweet Clean Airways, Mr. Strasburger, we have one of my favorite intellectuals to get to talk to. It is a guy who was first recommended to us by Professor Nancy Piercy as we were talking to her about some of the wonderful apologetics works that she's done. She was like, if you like me, you're going to love J. Warner Wallace. And so we have got him back for the 3rd time on the show to torture him with our less than stellar questions. It's detective and apologist Jim Wallace. What's going on, man?
Well, I'm actually, I'm glad to be on a show where I get tortured with stupid questions. Because it feels
Stupid questions. Wow.
You know, when you write a book, you end up doing interviews for the book. And,
right.
And it's, I hate to say that, but it's one of my least favorite things because I do like to talk about these issues.
Right.
But it feels like, my gosh, it's so self-focused. I'm constantly talking about me. So now if you can ask me something stupid that's not about me, I can turn it around and ask you a stupid question too.
That's perfect.
We'll
Kirsten,
have battle of stupid questions.
I like that. I like
I'm
this
totally
idea a
in.
little bit.
Yeah.
Okay,
So the new book is called The Truth in True Crime. My wife did mention to me as I was reading this, she was like, man, you do so good when you read Jim's books. She's like, versus some of the other apologists that you read. And I was like, you know why? Jim's books has pictures. And those pictures really help me to understand the concepts. Whereas, if Carl Truman or Professor Piercy are writing something, all it is like this block of text. I'm like, okay, I got to read this again. All right, I need to
really
marinate on
focus
that.
here.
Yeah, where I can read something that you've written, and then on the next page there's this picture, and I'm like, okay, now I get it. So I want to start with that.
Have you ever heard Nate Bargatze, the comedian?
Oh
talk
yeah,
about-
we got to see him in October.
Okay, did you
Yeah.
see his bit for Saturday Night Live where he talks about books and there's so many words? Like, give me a break, you know, like you don't want to catch a breath here. You know?
Just
I thought
throwing a
that's
few blank
exactly
pages.
how I feel about writing books too. I think I want to like space these things out. And this is a book that has, you know, it's a really quick read compared to a lot of the other books I've written.
Yeah.
So I still wanted to put, there was at one point the publisher was like, do we even need images in this book?
Yes.
I'm like, well, yeah, I think so. I think that people just want to break in the text.
Yeah,
right.
You know, think about it. Imagine if your Bible they went back to the original versions with no verse designations, no chapter designations, and a lot of the modern Bibles we have now, not just they have verses and chapters separated out, but they've also separated out within the chapter, like subject matter.
Right.
Now this parable, now that parable. And you think, well, that's no big deal. Oh yeah, it is. Because when you read it, you often will stop right there. You'll say, okay, this is a good breaking point, right? This is a place I can catch a breath. I thought when Nate said that, it was like brilliant because
Yeah.
it's so true of how we actually read.
Lucas,
take breaths.
don't you read a Bible that's free of that?
Yeah, I have the CSB Reader's Bible, and it's got no chapters or verse designations or anything.
Yeah.
And like,
Okay, so how do you feel about it? What's it like?
when I read the epistles, it's beautiful because there's no break in the ideas, that you just get to see the paragraph structure, because there's so many of the letters that Paul wrote that like chapter 8 ends, but the idea doesn't really end until like halfway
true.
through chapter 9. So there's some of that stuff that it's really,
That's
really
good.
great.
Yeah.
When I'm in the lineages, oh my gosh. I am begging. I'm absolutely begging for some diagram or something to say, hey, this is why this is important. You know, versus the trudge through it. Well, the new book is called The Truth in True Crime, and that's one of the first things I wanted to talk about were the use of the diagrams, right? That you use these things to illustrate several of the different points that you're making, particularly. And I don't want to give I've got questions for everything throughout this book, as I have for you like the last several times we've got to talk. But I don't want to give too much of the book away. So I want to start with some stuff that's like in the very beginning and kind of foundational for the book. You talk about 3 different types of identities. The inside out identity, the outside in identity, and the top side down. You've got a wonderful diagram about those things. That idea in particular is one that a lot of people are talking about. It's one that really culturally is becoming a really hot issue. Why do you think that is such an important thing for us as believers and people who are non-believers to understand, like where we get our identity from?
Well, I try to talk about these things a little bit different with every group I talk to. So I'm going to try to talk about it a little bit differently with you guys.
Great. Talk
So
about it like as
I
dumb
knew
as
that
you
identity
can.
was in part. Let's say that again.
Yeah, talk about it as dumb as like make it as
No.
simple
What
as
I mean
possible.
is though, it's like I get bored sometimes talking about the same issues over and over and over again, but there's so many nuances to them that it's just like a deep well you could really never dry out.
Yeah.
So when it comes to identity, this is another deep well. So much so that we do work in the summer, Susie and I, with police officers who have been critically injured. And their marriages are struggling. And often they can't even get to the dang resiliency retreat before they get divorced. So they don't even make it. But if I can get them there, we have a chance of helping them repair their marriages. And there's so many things you can think of, like, hey, what's the issue here? Like, where's the real struggle? Because it seems different in every couple. Well, it turns out that there's 2 things now that I focus on from the get-go with officers, whether they're, a female officer with the spouse or a male officer with the spouse. And sometimes we get both, where both are police officers. And it's identity is one of the first things. And you might think, well, what's that? Why? It's because it turns out that identity is one of these issues that is sneakily present in every other issue. And everywhere you struggle, this issue comes up. And it's what I've discovered. And a lot of these folks we are dealing with their agencies are trying to retire them medically. They are being diagnosed with PTSD, kind of like a military diagnosis of PTSD after an injury. And so the question then becomes, all right, so how do we help them kind of recover from this PTSD? Well, here's what I discovered is that every place where you have a traumatic event in your life, if you could chart it somehow, go back. And not all of us have had a lot of traumatic events. For a lot of us, the trauma might simply be that we didn't get something we were trying to get, like a job. But whatever it was, where you said, I struggled in that season, bad health diagnosis, an injury, a divorce, loss of a loved one, whatever it is that you said, yeah, I really struggled in that. If you go back and look at that season, you'll see that your identity shifted, how you saw yourself. If you saw yourself as bulletproof and then you get injured in a way that's like almost like embarrassing, you start to change the way you see yourself. If you saw yourself and identified yourself as a happily married, and that was really important to you, and then suddenly your spouse walks up and cheats on you or divorces you, it affects your identity, the way you see yourself. And so this is interesting. Trauma shifts identity. The converse is also true. When your identity shifts, you'll experience trauma.
Oh,
So knowing that, it explains a lot about what I'm dealing with when I see people who are suffering trauma. It's about identity and how they now see themselves. So if you did nothing else, recognize this. If you form your identity in a way that can be shifted or stolen or bruised or altered, you're more likely to suffer trauma. If you form your identity in something that is unchanging, transcendent, more bulletproof, doesn't change, you're less likely to suffer trauma. Or if you do suffer trauma, it's not as deep. So the three ways we form identity is, the way that the ancients did, outside in, where we look at something that's outside of ourselves, something that existed before we were even born, maybe. It's our group, our tribe, our nation, our ethnicity. Maybe it's the family occupation. I am a butcher. My family has always been butchers, and the ancients would do this. There were certain classes of people, and you identified yourself based on that class. Now, the problem, of course, with that is you may not even like that. It may not even be who you really are, and it can change. I discovered it myself because for years I was a cold case detective, and I thought I was pretty successful at it. And then I retired. And I struggled for 5 or 6 years trying to figure out who I was. Like, who am I now? Guys do this. We're terrible. We do it all the time. I have a friend named Joe Martin who says this about guys. And you tell me you should have him on your show. I think he's excellent.
yeah.
Joe does this thing where he'll say that all conversations between men are about the Asians. The conversation starts off with the first question. What do you do? Occupation is the first Asian. And what we're asking is, who are you really? Because we measure each other. Remember, all identity is comparative.
Yeah.
So it's not that you care about how strong you are, it's that I'm stronger than you. How rich you are, that I'm richer than you. It's a comparative thing. So the first thing we were asking is occupation, men. Second thing we typically ask once we get the occupation thing down is we're going, I don't know how much money that makes. Compensation is the second Asian. We're comparing. Oh, and I know if you're a brain surgeon, that requires a certain amount of training that I don't have. So you're comparing the next Asian, education. Oh, and if you're a brain surgeon, are you a good one? Reputation is the next Asian. And if you're a cop or in the military, there's an even better one, because I don't care if you're the most educated person in this room. I make the most money in this room. If I'm 6'8" and cut like a Greek god, I win. Intimidation is the next Asian. Okay. So it turns out, what are we doing here? We are looking at our identity and trying to figure out who we are compared to others. Now, that outside in, that's an ancient way of doing identity, but the most part today, a lot of young people are forming it from the inside out. So what they're saying is, there's something that I desire on the inside, something that's so unique to me. It's my desires, my preferences, my unique giftedness. If you're not a Christian, you would say, your innate giftedness or your innate ability.
Sure.
And I'm so good at this that this is how I identify. And I'm going to ask all of you on the outside to recognize that this is how I see myself based on my personal desires, and you must accept that. It could even be based on my sexual preference or based on my gender identity. You will see this is how I feel on the inside. You will just recognize it. That's an inside out approach. The problem with both the outside in and the inside out approach is they can be shifted. You can take away someone's outside in identity. Eventually, you're going to retire away from that outside in identity.
Yeah.
Right.
And your desires of your heart will change every other minute. So you put your identity in something that shifts that easily, then be ready for a turbulent life. Now, if you can go topside down, if you can put your identity in Christ as a Christian, things will change because, and I don't know, even though I knew this was true for me as a guy who's getting ready to retire, and I look forward to my retirement for years.
Right.
And then that day I retired, I was a Christian the day before I retired and a Christian the day after. Yet I still suffered with this because I wasn't putting I just said my identity was in Christ. My identity was really my work. That's a very selfish, by the way, that's pride. Pride is that thing that says, no, look, I'm different than you. I can do this better than you. Remember, all identity is comparative. And what we don't like, I think sometimes, is to think, well, if I'm in Christ and you two guys are in Christ, then we're just the same. No. You're not going to lose your uniqueness.
Yeah.
That's what we have to remember, is that God's going to use us in different ways. But we have to put our identity in something that doesn't shift. And so a lot of the work we're trying to do with couples is to help them get their identity in something they can't lose, that a spouse can't bruise, that your kids can't mess up, that your job can't fire, that your community can't sue. Your identity isn't something that transcends all of that. And if it is, you're gonna survive this.
That's pretty incredible, especially when we get to do a lot of work with law enforcement. Josh gets to do a lot of work with a company called Echelon Front that Jocko Willing and Leif Babin started that does leadership consulting. But you guys do a lot of stuff with law enforcement. We've got some
first responders.
yeah. We do some law enforcement training here. We've got an event coming up on June 11th where we're going to be doing that, and it's interesting to me how much that group in particular, how much of their entire persona, their ego, is tied to their job. And I think that, when you have people in law enforcement, when you have first responders, when you have guys that are former military, but even with people who are like civil servants, that is, whether it is a job that puts you in the line of danger, or whether your identity is, hey, this is what I do for my community. I'm a pastor, I'm an alderman, a city councilman, or whatever. So much of our identity is tied to that. And when we get voted out, when we move to the new place, when something happens in the department or whatever, and those things change, that there is this, this trauma, this loss of identity. When you're talking about this in this chapter, you're talking about a young man named Lincoln, who is who's an incredible athlete and ends up in a place that is almost unfathomable for people on the outside looking in. Can you tell us a little bit of that story and why, you use that story, because it is so powerful when we're talking about identity?
Well, so this is a guy who his entire family were really good athletes, and he kind of saw himself in that legacy of football players, his dad, his brother, that would, eventually take his place in the family, maybe even in his view, be the best of the good family members, right? So he has this great high school career, and then he hurts his knee. I think he originally thought he was going to recover from that, but it was just the kind of injury you couldn't recover from. And originally he was taking pain meds. That ended up evolving into other things. A friend has eventually introduced him to the harder stuff, and now he's a drug addict. Not that many years later, suffering from his loss of his identity. Who am I now? It's interesting too. One of the things we don't do when we struggle with identity is because we have not prepared ourselves in a number of varied areas. And that's one of the things the gospel does. In other words, if I put all of my eggs in this football basket and then I can't play football anymore, I got nothing to rely on. I got nothing to lean on. And that's exactly what he did. And he just didn't have any other way to identify himself. And he was doing what you would also do. He was doing inside out and outside in. It's not as though we do one or the other exclusively. We typically do a little bit of both. And he was doing that, right? He was saying, I'm part of this family. I identify as this family. Like I did the same thing. We are a 3-generation law enforcement family. If you're a Wallace, especially if you're a Jim Wallace, you're a cop. Because there's 3 of us named Jim Wallace who are
such
cops.
A good cop name.
Yeah. So you have
Jim Wallace.
And there's the
problem,
right? There's the problem is that you now you're doing that outside in. Yeah. Also, he was good at this. Like, it wasn't like he learned it. He learned a lot of stuff, but he was just innately gifted. I don't want to use that word gifted if you're not thinking there's a gifter,
right. But
he had innate skills. And so he was doing a little bit of outside in and a little bit of inside out. I felt the same way. I felt like, hey, I'm good at making these visual cases for juries. It's where my skill set is. and it's part of my family tradition. So we're both doing the outside in and the inside out stuff.
Would you say that typically with your identity, people default to a subjective, more, I guess, selfish look at it, just by
Yes.
nature?
Yeah. Well, I think what we do is all of this is driven by pride, right? Because it's so comparative. So
Yeah.
what we're also going to do. So when you look at the studies on identity, you'll see a couple of things. One, the definition about how we perceive self is we were looking for the most continuous and stable. That word continuous and stable is in the APA definitions on identity. So, okay, that's interesting. That's why you don't want to put your identity in something that's not continuous and stable. That's number one. Two, you see that the research is almost always interconnected. Like you can hardly ever study identity when you're not also studying some research on value and purpose, because value and purpose are so connected to identity. So there's a couple of ways you can form identity, right? One, you can say, I'd be wise if we do it this way. We say, like, who am I really? Think about it. And then form your value and purpose after you've decided who you are in Christ. Okay, we don't do that. What we typically do is the opposite. We're doing something that we're good at, gives us value, and it's our purpose. And we say, that's who I am. So instead of taking our identity first and forming our value and purpose from our identity, we're looking at what we're valuable and purposeful and forming our identity off of that. And then the problem, of course, is
When
what
that
happens
goes
when
away.
you're no longer valuable in that area, or you don't feel like that's your purpose, and now you're struggling. Right now, it's like, oh, now what do I do? So I always put it this way when I'm talking to groups. Let me see what I have on my desk here. If I said this remote, do you know what this remote is for?
Yes.
Well, not really. Maybe you do.
Some
because you've got
lights.
some to it.
LED lights.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, I don't even have this on. This remote is for my lights back there.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like.
Okay, but if you didn't know that, if you didn't know what this is for, I could use it a number of ways. I could assign it its purpose and identity. I could make it a doorstop. I could prop up stuff with it. I could
Throw it at
use
someone.
it to prop. I could give it some other purpose, and it might work just fine in that regard. But if you really want to know what this is for, you need to look at the brand on it, and then you're just going to Google it, and then when you find the website, you'll discover, oh, this is for lights. Okay, well, it turns out that's true for all of us always. If you want the surest way to know what something's purpose is simply to refer to the manufacturer. Now, that's what we're not doing here, is that we're not referring, if we are what Christianity says we are, well, then there's a manufacturer we could refer to. And then we could form our identity based on what the manufacturer intended, because the manufacturer will tell you, yeah, you could use it for those other things, but I intended it for this purpose.
Right.
And now you actually could use, not that you can't assign value and assign purpose to things incorrectly. We do that all the time. The question is, like, what's the manufacturer's purpose?
That's surprisingly deep off a remote.
Of a remote control.
I mean-
Yeah. This is one of the reasons that I like Detective Warner Wallace, is because of these kinds of things, right? There is a really simple conclusion you draw in the beginning of the book about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And I think this is something that, from a pastoral perspective, that I wish I would have learned earlier on, because if I would have recognized what other people were trying to tell me as like applicable wisdom versus just like, oh, these are a few things I need to look out for or whatever, just kind of input, output.
Yeah.
Especially as a young guy where you're like, all right, old man, kind of attitude, right?
Yeah.
But you bring up this point that failure is the root of wisdom. One of the things I think especially when we're looking at our very curated views of ourselves on social media, everything is perfect.
Yeah.
And
it's all the good stuff.
Yeah, and part of our identity is in, like what you've talked about, that comparison that we have to others, which might be more of an epidemic than it ever has been, right? And comparison is absolutely the thief of joy. And so when we see those kinds of things, there is the idea that you put forth that failure is the root of wisdom. Well, in a culture where failure is like the pinnacle of embarrassment, it's the last thing that we want to do.
Right.
right? How do those of us who are our parents, those of us who are our pastors and leaders, how do we give the people around us the room to fail so that, you know, they realize that it's something that they can actually learn from and not something they should be ashamed of?
You know, it's so interesting when they survey married couples and they ask women like what is the thing they fear the most. It's almost always some form of loss of relationship connectivity. When they ask men what we fear the most, it's almost always the perception of failure. It's shame. It's that I don't have the ability to do this.
Wow.
So you're right. That's why I think we shun the idea. But here's the good news, is that yes, failure is, and there's been studies out there. I cite these in the book. This is a different chapter in the book. So I cite these studies that talk about how often failure is what opens the door to making small improvements, and how many times that successful people have to fail before they actually hit on the thing that takes off.
Right.
It's so interesting because it's not so much, well, they were just not lucky. No, it's actually that the failing part of it. You know this also in team sports, right?
Yes.
Like if you got a team that's undefeated, now they're in the NFL and they're in week 15 and they finally take a loss. A lot of times they'll say, you know what, that was good for us because we needed that loss before we enter the playoffs, because we're going to learn more from that loss than the first 14 wins.
Mm-hmm.
We now know what we need to improve. We didn't know before. And failure has that ability for us. It can do, but here's the good news. It doesn't have to be your failure, because we learn as much from the failure of others as we do from our own failures. And so
Right.
if you're just a keen observer of failure, that can help you. But there's actually an aspect of wisdom that I try to cite in the book that I think is uniquely Christian. So you could say, well, this is the whole point of the book, is there's 15 attributes for human flourishing that I try to expose with 15 crime stories, and then support with 15 bodies of scientific secular research that demonstrates that this is what we think is true about human flourishing. And then finally, show how the Christian worldview has been saying this all along. That even if you don't believe Christianity is true, that you'd be wise to live as though it is, because it turns out human flourishing is dependent on the traditional teaching of Christianity. Believe it or not, that's what this book is trying to do. And one of those aspects, I think there's really two that I can think of off the top of my head that require a Christian worldview to do well, is the first chapter on wisdom is one of them. And here's why. One of the components, it's not just knowledge and experience and failure, being willing to make what I call age-appropriate mistakes. It's okay to fail, but you want to fail at the level where you are. So if you're a first-year homicide detective and you make some first-year homicide detective mistakes, no problem. But if you're a 10-year homicide detective and you're still making first-year homicide detective mistakes, we got a problem.
It's like growing pains, but you haven't grown yet.
That's right. It needs to be age-appropriate failure. So that's okay. But here's the other thing. Could I say, hey, there's a wise way to do a kidnapping? Now, I've talked to gangsters about this issue. Like I had one that I did not in the book, but I had one who I remember they did a robbery of a hotel in our town. It was like one of these like kind of like a holiday. It was like a one-person hotel at night. Like a couple of people could staff the hotel at night. So
Right.
someone behind the counter, maybe somebody in maintenance, and that was it. So they came in the front door, put her at gunpoint, but the safe was in the back. So they walked her out the front door, drove her around to the back of the hotel, and entered the back office to get to the safe. And just that movement is legally now a kidnapping. They moved her against her will. So now they've done a robbery and a kidnapping. And trust me, the kidnapping part is far worse from a legal perspective in terms of time you're not to serve than the robbery was. So they've done both now. The question comes up afterwards, well, was that wise? Is there a wise way to do a robbery? Now, in one sense, you could say, well, yeah. If you mean, is there a way to be more successful? But I think you could honestly ask, is it ever wise to do a robbery? In other words, there's a fourth dimension to wisdom that most people don't think about, and it's the moral pillar. There's actually one study out of an Ivy League school I cite in the book that talks about how there's got to be a moral pillar into the formation of wisdom because of this kind of thing. That some things are just not wise to do based on their immoral nature. Okay, well, then the question becomes, well, who gets to decide then on what is moral? Because if the gangsters will say it, they've got their own code of conduct. And it's sometimes appropriate to do a robbery or a kidnapping to retaliate against another gang.
Yeah.
So in other words, if your moral foundation is determined by a group or by a person, then it's really possible to do some stupid, unwise things, even though you might think they are morally grounded.
Right.
So this means then that we have to seek an objective, transcendent source for moral truth to know if it's true wisdom. I call this better wisdom. That means that really the best wisdom you're going to get is going to be under some theistic view in which you consider that moral pillar to be a godly moral pillar, not a cultural moral pillar or a subset moral pillar, the gang's code of ethics. If you're working in that East Coast in the old mafia days, there were certain codes of conduct that you just didn't violate, and a lot of it involved murdering people.
Yeah.
That was okay to do in a certain, so that's why we have to have a transcendent moral pillar. But that just means that if you want to be really wise, if you want better wisdom, you have to kind of ground it in something more than you.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of the recent comments by guys like Richard Dawkins, who have, a decade and a half ago were coming out just vehemently against Christianity, that anyone who bought into faith of any kind just showed that they were intellectually inept. And we've seen this shift, and maybe it started with Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose as they're kind of making this shift back towards that. But Dawkins has recently come out and said, one, that he's proud that he comes from a Christian nation, and that's the foundation of the morality. And he's from the UK, the morality of the UK, the way that they write and structure their laws. When we're seeing people like that make those type of comments, does that, one, do you think that means that somebody like Dawkins, because obviously a lot of influential Christian YouTubers and influencers and those kind of things, much as I hate to use that terminology, they're like, oh my gosh, this much means that Dawkins is on the path towards Christianity.
Yeah, he's reachable.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, everyone is reachable.
There we
and
go,
there's
yeah.
no one who's beyond the path that God can't reach them. So,
Perfect.
So that part I get. And
Yeah.
I think what he's saying here, it may not be that he's actually favoring. He may just be saying, in some sense, as you read through his comments, well, this is a lot better than Islam. And that seems to be where he stands in a lot of positions, right? It's like, but I think he holds a position kind of like my dad, where he doesn't think it's true, but it's useful. My dad always thought of Christianity as a useful delusion. Not true, but it'll help you raise your kids. He'll go to church with you. He'll sing the hymns. He likes the hymns. He likes the kind of cultural worldview that Christianity actually founds. That
The morality
that
of it
encourages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he would go, and he has enough cultural awareness of what the hymns are that he could stand in church and sing a hymn. I always wonder how he learned that, because I never went to church with my dad. Never. I don't think I've ever attended a church service. No, he did come to our church when I was the lead pastor.
Really?
He one weekend he happened to be in town, and so he was there, and he sang with us. So I think that, but honestly, that growing up, that was just not who my dad was. He'd be more likely to drop you off if you got somebody who wants to go to church than he would never go in.
Yeah.
So I think that the issue is that Dawkins is kind of like that this has some, but isn't Jordan Peterson in a similar way where I don't believe it's true, but boy, it sure seems to capture what's true about human nature and leverage it for our flourishing.
Yeah.
Well, there's the question then. So is it just an unbelievable coincidence that the principles that are taught happen to align with the principles that the sociologists have determined contribute to human flourishing? Is that a coincidence? I would say that if you made an overarching cumulative case for the Christian worldview, it's going to include a lot of things. It's going to include, and I've been speaking about it this way publicly now since I wrote this book. It's going to include the case for God's existence, and they'll have 5 or 6 or 8 different pieces of evidence you'll use to make that. That's going to point toward Christianity being true. Mm-hmm. The case for the reliability of Scripture is going to point toward Christianity being true. The case for the resurrection is going to point toward Christianity being true. The case for the overarching, unbelievable, unparalleled impact of Jesus on culture, that I wrote about that in a book called Person of Interest, that's going to point toward it being true. And then there's another piece of this, which is that if it is true that the Bible should describe us accurately, it should describe the world and people in it exactly as the world is and as people are. And it seems to do that.
Yeah.
So you could reverse engineer this, and you could say, hey, well, if this does seem to create the best environment, but I still think right now the Dawkins would probably say, well, yeah, this is the creation of humans who happen to recognize what creates the best environment and then built a religious system around it. That's probably where he is right now. So he doesn't think it's true, but he thinks it's useful. So I'm kind of a realist about him. I don't know that this is really, it means anything, but I think at the same time, I mean, if you'd known me at the age of 35, just how hostile I was, my profanity and my views of Christians, I don't think you would ever guess I'd ever become one. Yet within 18 months, here I am. So God can do anything. So I'm not going to put it past God but I often think it's harder for God to do some things because we continue to make a mess of them. And the more we talk about Dawkins
that's
as though
true.
he's on the verge of becoming a Christian, I wonder if we aren't making a mess of this too and just delaying the inevitable because, he's going to look at all this. At some point, he's going to react to that and he's going to say, no, I'm not a Christian, for crying out loud.
Right.
He's gonna,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I realize how much everybody wants me on your team, but I don't.
yeah, exactly. How
It's,
flattering it is. Apparently, you like me because you want me on the team.
Yeah, that's like when Eli Manning was drafted to the Chargers, and they were like, he's like, we're not going there. You can send me to New York, and they'll make a trade for it, right? That same type of deal, right?
How sad is that? But I mean, I think that this is true. I think we have hope for a couple of guys, for him and for Jordan Peterson, because and let me just tell you what I think this is another chapter of this book, and I wrote this chapter because I saw this issue of celebrity that I really wanted to talk about, but. And
I was trying to get here without getting here. So I'm glad you're going to this place. Like this is where I was wanting you to get. So
oh, really?
Awesome. Yeah,
okay, well, good. So there was a guy named Pallone who was a gangster. He was a really well-known gangster in this for a number of reasons, both based on who he was and his family and how he looked and all this stuff. So, but his life didn't turn out well, and this chapter kind of talks about this. But what I was interested in is how much celebrity pride affects us. And it also affects people so this is a worldview. Our worldview is a worldview that leverages the one thing that promotes human flourishing more than any other thing. And that is this weird attribute that hardly anyone will just guess off the top of their head, which is called humility. Because it's the antidote for celebrity. It's the opposite of celebrity. It's humility. And most of the guys I work who think so much of themselves that they do all kinds of stupid things, this is what they lack. They lack humility. And most of the people, for example, who are resistant to the claims of Christianity, it's a humility issue. I'm just going to say that it is. I mean, so if when you hear people pontificate and explain how smart they are, and try to explain smartly how all of the data that seems to be dependent upon the truth of a Christian worldview can be explained some other way, through psychological phenomena or through whatever, science, whatever it may be, that's often that lack of humility that's keeping us from, because it turns out one of the things that humble people do more than anyone else is we learn. We learn because we are not so proud that we can't be taught anything. Humility is the key to learning. It is not only the key, it's been statistically proven. You'll get better grades. There's one study that shows you'll be able to discern truth from error at a higher level, at a higher rate, if you're simply humble. You'll have deeper relationships. You'll live longer. You'll have better mental health. You'll make more money. You'll be a better employee, a better employer. Generally, we resist people who are proud, yet we watch them on YouTube, and we often will follow them because we think, oh, this guy's smart. Well, it might just be that smart is what's keeping him from the truth. Is that you start to value your own ability to process information. And you start to think, hey, this is a good take. I like my takes better,
Yeah.
And then before long, you're not listening to truth anymore.
Right.
Like you can't see the thing that's standing right in front of you because you're just so full of yourself that I would rather, look, am I guilty of this? Yeah. As a matter of fact, these 15 attributes in this book are 15 things I don't do well. I don't know anybody who does any of these things well. These are targets we got to aim at, but we very seldom ever can hit them. Most of the time, we are just the opposite of what these 15 things would tell us. And I'm the same way. And so when I hear people who are just love to wait for you to stop talking so they can share their next theory, I see myself in that.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to see ourselves in that.
Yeah.
Because in the end, this is the one worldview that happens to leverage from start to finish the one most significant thing you can do for human flourishing. Was that a coincidence that it turns out that there's no other worldview that leverages humility like Christianity? It starts with the first admission that you're a sinner. That takes humility.
Yeah.
It starts with you having to bend your knee and admit there's a God and you're not him. That takes humility. It continues because you can't earn anything under this worldview. Every other spiritual worldview has got a series of steps you can take to attain what the best this worldview offers. And even under secularism, it's meritorious. You can earn your way to the top. This is a worldview. And by the way, once you do that, you just separate yourself from others, right?
Yeah.
I know I make more money than you. It's that whole identity thing of comparison. Yet this is a worldview that says, no, your identity is in Christ now. So stop comparing. Number two, you're going to be given this because you could never earn it. And you're going to be given this as a free gift. Why does Paul say that? So that no one can boast. You're going to take that whole pride thing out from under me. Now, it just turns out that that one act of humility, being humble, will contribute to the best life you can live. And it turns out that there's no worldview that is more grounded in humility than the Christian worldview. It might be that your designer has designed the truth in such a way that you can apprehend it through Scripture and actually become the best version of you can become. Because it's a coincidence. It's not just a useful delusion. It might just be that this is the design of the designer and you are the designed. But I think for a lot of people, and this all started, I was talking about some of these more famous skeptics and atheists and agnostics, what's keeping them out is this lack of humility.
Do you find
And you cannot pursue humility. You cannot say, I cannot say to you guys, here's how you can become humble. All I can say is it's a realization. It's what Spurgeon says, the proper assessment of who you are.
Do you find that Christians struggle with this? I mean, I know Christians are people, obviously, but on a broad spectrum, you get a lot of non-believers that are very critical of Christians and how they act. Do we not help with that in the way we live our lives? Is that something you see a lot of?
Well, I think that we have to be uber careful about the same things that everyone needs to be careful about generally, only because people are looking at us. And we are far more likely to be hypocrites than any other group. And here's why. We have a
This is what I
firm,
was going for.
rigid standard that is unparalleled.
Right.
The standard is perfection. It's God's holy, perfect nature. That's the standard. Well, if your standard was lower, you could probably hit the standard once in a while, but the standard is not low. That's number one. Number two is we publicly profess it. So everyone knows our worldview and what the standard is. They all know what the standard is. Look, there's some people, they're not Christians. I don't know what they believe. I have no idea what their personal standards are. I couldn't tell you if they're acting hypocritically because I don't know what their standard was to begin with.
Right.
But everyone knows the public standard of Christians. So you can spot us when we're hypocritical much faster than you can spot other groups where you don't know what their standard is.
Right.
So I think that for us, we are going to appear to break that more often. But the reality of it is that we have because there are no gatekeepers anymore. And because, you don't become famous by landing one of those 15 primetime episodes of a TV show on the 3 legacy networks like 30 years ago.
Right.
If you weren't at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock on ABC, NBC, or CBS, you weren't a star.
Yeah.
You didn't have an audience of followers. Now, what are we doing here? You've got an audience. You've got an audience on YouTube.
Right.
There's no gatekeeper. If you work hard enough, you can become a celebrity. This is open to everyone without gatekeepers. This is also true for pastors. As a matter of fact, we justify usually that we want the larger platform. There's 3 things, this is a different chapter of the book, that people do, that they exploit, that they idolize, they worship at their own peril, and it is sex, money, and the pursuit of power. Now, most of us as pastors will see the danger in sex and money, but they don't see the danger in this aspect of the pursuit of power called celebrity seeking. They actually think that's a positive. Let me hire someone, in fact, to get me more exposure so I can preach the gospel to a larger audience. when in fact, that pursuit of celebrity is another itch that if you scratch it, you will scratch the other two itches. I know very few people who don't become famous who then aren't tempted sexually or tempted by misusing money. The temptations weren't even there before they were famous. Then they become famous and suddenly they've opened the door to other temptations.
Right.
So we have to, if you know where we fall and how we fall and why we fall, it becomes a little bit easier to protect yourself from falling. But we don't typically protect ourselves from celebrity. And even as pastors, we've all got a podcast. We've all got, look, I've done that. I mean, we're all guilty of this. So this is why in the last, I'd say 3 years, even though, I run in the same circles as all those other apologists you talk about, I've just said, okay, we're just going to step back. We're going to start talking about these issues publicly, and we're going to do less public events, because that to me is the most uncomfortable aspect of this, is that you stand on a stage and people think you're something. Now, I know the truth. I'm not something. I'm just another person like you who's making observations, who sees the world around me, and I want to talk about it, but I wish I could talk about it without having to take a stage.
Yep.
So we're trying to do more of that, right? Let's see if we can. And I just love, I think also just my vanity is such that as I get older, do I really want to see myself yakking on a screen anymore? I don't, So that has kind of helped me to step back a little bit. But I think this is my other concern, and it really started with Ravi. It started with Ravi, and it started with Mark Driscoll. Two guys who I thought a lot of at one point. And that it's been eye-opening. And by the way, this is in a different chapter in the book. This is true for all of us. Look, guys, there's no good guys and bad guys. We all have the killer inside. I've never really met anybody working cold cases who wasn't pretty much like everybody else.
Yeah.
Like just like us. As a matter of fact, for 30 years, 35 years, they've been excellent citizens, and you would like to have them over for dinner. And the people, when you take them to jail, are like, there's no way. I've got suspects I took to jail who's the victim's family said there's no way. They thought of him like a son-in-law. There's no way that guy killed my daughter. No way. Because you can't see it, because we're all that guy. That is one of the hard things about law enforcement, I think, is that, you drive down the street and you take a call and you're at a house on the middle of the street and it's a nice neighborhood, and you pull into that house and you see what a train wreck is going on inside that house. This domestic situation is such, and wow, how messy our lives are. And then you go back out to your car, and you get in your car, you've settled that call, and now you're driving away, and you go, wow, that house looks like every other house on this street and on my street. And then you start to wonder how many other houses are just as messy as that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's far more than you'd like to think. And that's just because of the fallen nature of who we are. But I think we have to ask that question. And I try to ask and answer it in one chapter of this book is who are you? Are you an innately pure, clean, innocent being that is corrupted by families and situations and environments and governments and systems? So, we got to be careful about we got to restructure all those things to protect the innate goodness of humans. Or are you the kind of train wreck mess that will mess up every family, every institution, including religious institutions, and every system? Because if that's the case, then you start to form systems differently. You form them like we did when we formed the country, with hopefully sufficient checks and balances, because the human nature is such that if I can corrupt this, I will.
Right.
And by the way, I'm not quick to replace systems, because I know that whatever I replace the system with, I'm just going to find that's going to get corrupted too.
Right.
I mean, there is no system that humans haven't corrupted. There isn't. So I would pick the system that has the most checks and balances, because we have to know something about human nature before we form the system. And don't assume the best in us, because we will disappoint you.
Yeah. That is one of the things that I've always found a challenge, the rebel in me. That's like, yes, I know that I need things for checks and balances, but we'll get 2 or 3 years down the road, and then I'll have another meeting with our elders and our ministry team, and I'm like, hey guys, I just want y'all to know we're at the point now where I am looking for loopholes. So let's have a conversation about like the things that need to happen. And I do think, to your point, the honest self-assessments, but then also like having people around you that you're willing to be honest with to say those kinds of things, right? If I don't say that, we've got a $2,500 spending limit without it, having to go to a congregational vote or whatever that is, where I'm like, okay, so this is the one thing I want to accomplish, and I am already thinking about how I can break this up into 5 pieces, so I don't need to vote. So like, let's have the, let's have the conversation about it, because that's kind of where our minds head. And I think that's such an awesome point, man. Just so you know, I love watching you yak on a screen, and we could do it all day. We do want to be respectful of your time. We thank you so much for coming on the show. But as you well know, we end all of our interviews with a segment that we call controlled routing. Now, this is just a series of rapid-fire questions. You can answer them with as short or as lengthy an answer as you would like to. Expect nothing from us by way of reply or response. As we get into it, I'm going to send it over to Josh to kick us off.
All right. So I'm just curious about what kind of pushback you've gotten over the years and how you've dealt with it. The goods, the bads. Have you always dealt with it right, correctly, that type of thing?
Okay, so I get pushback from people who are online who are not Christians, who are usually atheists, who will literally lie about my background to try to leverage a platform that they have, and that's okay. I never respond. Here's I've learned early on, because you learn this in the academy. It's kind of a mind over matter. I don't mind, you don't matter, because if you don't take that approach, everyone who cusses at you in the street, you're going to end up swinging on them. You can't do that. You have to be like, just a really, really thick skin, even when they say things that aren't true. So yes, I have. That's been my response always, is that, hey, I'm on mission. I'm going to do what I know. I don't respond to lies. Just don't do it.
Yeah, I have. I've seen some cartoonized versions of you that a few people have sent me. They're like, you've had this guy on your show, and I'm like, actually, that's a cartoon.
Yeah, I haven't had any cartoons on my show.
I've talked to the real person who that's behind, and the person who's hosting the show is also a cartoon. So if you're trusting cartoons more than the real thing, then maybe you're the one with the issue. I'm noticing in the background there, we've got a silver YouTube play button, man. When did that happen?
I guess about almost a year ago.
Wow,
man.
Yeah. So what's that?
Yeah,
What's that feel
crazy.
like? You're
That's
now
just,
officially
you just
an
get to
influencer.
100,000 people on YouTube, and then they send you one of these things.
Oh,
They just give it to anybody, huh?
Yeah, you just.
So someone said you should put it behind you, because some people will know what that is.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're the first person who's ever said anything about
Well,
it. So
you're
I don't
welcome.
think anyone knows what that is.
Yeah, I know
do.
exactly what it is.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You're officially an influencer now. Congratulations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If
And,
all
and
your
you know what's
years-
interesting about that is that I don't even manage my YouTube channel. I have a guy who I support who is doing that. We don't get any profit or anything from that channel. We just hopefully can help a young man launch a business of his own, and that's what we do with that. So
That's pretty cool.
it's been great. I mean, what's great about all of this is if you start with the pension, if you just start with the pension, you have freedom, because we don't have any
Pensions
this
equal
isn't going
freedom. Wait a
anywhere.
minute.
I'm not changing
Pensions equal
anything.
freedom.
I'm not. If I made an extra $1 million this year, I tell you, I'm not kidding. I'm not even sure I do any remodeling around here. I'm not doing nothing. Okay, I like my life the way it is.
That's
and I'm
beautiful.
still driving Hyundais, and I'm happy to drive Hyundais. I'm a big
Nice.
fan of Hyundais.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, why would I overspend? I remember one time I was getting ready to buy an F-150. I wanted to buy an F-150 truck. And I told my son, David, I'm going to buy an F-150 for my 60th birthday. He said, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, well, you were a pastor. Like, you're a Christian leader. Do you want people to see you're driving an F-150? A brand, those things cost like 80 grand back then.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. I didn't know my son was paying that much attention to this kind of
Wow.
stuff.
Okay.
But it reminded me that, you're right. There's probably a certain level beyond which we ought not live. That's kind of what we were talking about before, is that people are watching and we have a higher standard. And do I really need that? So I didn't buy it.
Yeah. That's why we buy used and we know a guy. That's what I was here. Start
That's right.
your
Used and we know a
Used
guy.
and
That's
we
the
know
way
a
to
guy.
put it.
start with a pension and then move to used and we know a guy and let
That's
somebody
right.
else take the losses on all of it. I think that's
That's right.
That's the way
That's
to
the
do it.
move.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. What
That's
you got,
the way
man?
to do it.
All right, let's talk energy drinks. All right.
Okay.
2-part question. What are your favorites and how many do you drink a day?
Okay, I only drink one. Okay, but I drink it at 2
Okay.
o'clock. This is it. I usually try to pour it in a cup here so nobody knows that I'm.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
All right.
Doesn't
Well,
that
then,
look like as though, but these aren't that bad. You know those Celsius drinks? I was drinking those. Those
Oh,
are
man.
ridiculously high in
yeah.
caffeine.
Yep.
So I tried to kind of ratchet it back to one. And you know how I started that? My dad came out for my son's wedding years ago, And he said, let's go get an energy drink, a Monster. I said, what the heck is that? And I didn't know what it was. So we go and we get an energy. He's like, he's 21 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was drinking one a day.
Okay.
And this started a fad with my family that we call him Opa. I'm now
Right.
the Opa because I'm the old guy. But we used to always at 2:00 every day, we would toast to whoever is in the energy drink circle. And usually it just started off as me and David and Jimmy, my two boys, and
Right.
Opa. So we used to, if we were gone, we'd say, this is to Opa and Jimmy. And David and I would drink an energy drink.
That's awesome.
And this became a daily ritual.
Okay.
That whenever we're together, I have my daughter here today. She's part of that circle.
Nice.
So she came over and we popped an energy drink and we toasted to the people who aren't here.
Do you drink
what we
one
did.
before when you were a pastor? Did you drink one before you got on the pulpit?
Yeah, I used to, it's like a comfort food sometimes.
Okay.
So if I'm traveling and I'm out at some church, I sometimes will make sure I have an energy drink in my bag just because I feel like I'm at home. Is that stupid?
No.
It's like a comfort food.
So
Yeah.
no coffee though, just one energy
Oh,
drink.
no,
a day.
I drink coffee. up
There we
until the
go.
point
There
I'm
we
ready
go.
for an
My
energy
guy
drink.
right
All right,
there.
we're
Let's
on the
keep in
level
mind,
now.
If there wasn't for caffeine, I would be like a puddle.
You don't
on
have
the
to
floor.
tell
I'd
me.
have nothing left.
Yeah, I think that's the
Okay.
one reason I haven't become a Mormon is because of caffeine. Like that,
100%.
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
other stuff is really
Yeah.
not a factor.
No, I'm
It's
sure
just
at
the
some point
caffeine
I'll have,
thing
have
in general.
I'll have full cardiac arrest and I'll have to stop all this. But until
Yeah.
then,
Well,
Same.
drinking.
Yeah, we need to get you on some of the Jocko Goes that we've been on because they're low caffeine, but they're really good.
Right. Very
Yeah,
clean.
Oh, yeah.
and sugar free.
Yep.
So,
Oh, you know what? What are they called?
Jocko Go. Yeah, it's
I don't think I've ever
seasoned-
seen that.
Oh, okay. I'll shoot me an email. I'll get a
Okay,
case sent out
all
to
right,
you so
yeah,
you can give
I'll
them a
have to
try.
get some of those. Okay,
All right,
good, I'll try.
Yeah, last question as we're wrapping up. What are you learning on your guitar? Like the last couple of times we've talked to you, you said you haven't been able to play much. Like what's going
Okay,
on
so
in the
I just
musical
now have a
world
granddaughter.
for Jim? Okay.
So it's all stupid songs.
Okay, like
Kid songs.
like what?
Okay, I'm going to tell you something. Okay, then you're going to get really geeked out on this. This is I have my granddaughter 4 days a week, so
Okay.
all of our musical tastes have shifted to kids. She's 13 months old.
Right.
So let me just tell you,
I'm ready.
there's a guy out there. Okay,
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna turn you on to some really good stuff now. You ready?
Cannot wait.
His name is Brent Holmes, Holmes.
Looking him up right
He
now.
does tunes for kids.
Okay.
He's got a album of Hawaiian. This is the stupidest thing ever. It's called
I love
Island Tunes. Island Tunes.
Island
okay?
tunes.
It's like
Volcano Juice, written
yeah,
and sung
I'm
by
just
Brent
telling you
Holmes.
that this
one of
is
the first ones.
he's got this song.
That's what it's
Okay,
called.
this is how
It's called
bad this
Volcano
is.
Juice.
This is how old I'm getting now. It's like we listen to this on a loop basically every time we're with our daughter, our granddaughter Emma, and there's a song that he does. It's called "The Kooky Little Coconut."
Okay.
Now everyone thinks I'm an idiot now. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
But that's what we listen to now. And so those are easy to learn on the guitar. And you can just literally put it on and sit down with your guitar and you could be playing it as before the end of the song, you already know how to play it.
Yeah.
And you just play it and then you can play it all the time.
I'm looking at it right now, the Kooky Little Coconut.
Mango
Okay.
Man.
You know
Yeah.
what? Don't play it. Don't play it until we get
It's
off
better
this
than
call.
Baby Shark, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I'm telling you, that's a good one. Also, listen to Volcano Juice and tell
Okay.
me you don't love that song.
Volcano Juice, the first
Juice
one
and
that popped
Kooky Little
up.
Coconut. Those are my two favorite.
All
All
right,
right. So I'm just going to let it go there.
do y'all watch Bluey?
Oh, no, I know. I don't.
Okay.
So this is the one I tell you, we don't have a lot of media.
Okay.
We are we are trying to go anti-media, but music
Perfect.
is the
Yeah.
only exception. We love music. We want
So
to be
The
love music.
Bluey theme song is really good.
And very
Right?
Okay.
It's just it's just a major scale. But if you look up the Bluey theme song instrument
I will.
parade, the guitar solo in the instrument parade is
Really?
so good.
Okay.
It's
All right.
unbelievable.
I'm looking
And-
it up right now.
Yeah, and there are
Okay.
several guys who are like shred head metal guitarists that do tutorials on the kids show.
Oh, you're not
guitar
kidding.
solo.
It pops right up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the guitar solo and the Bluey theme instrument parade is awesome.
Okay, I'll look at it. As soon as I get off with you guys, I'll play
All
it.
right, awesome. Jim, thanks so much for coming on the show,
Yep,
man.
yep,
Thanks
good
for
to
the
be
book.
with you guys, as
Yeah,
always.
We
Let's do it again.
absolutely appreciate it. We'll do it again
Okay,
soon.
man.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Thanks
Be
so
good.
much.
Talk to you later.
All right, later, brother. Bye. Jay freaking Warner Wallace.
He was pretty awesome.
Dude, so this is your first time getting to talk to him.
First time.
Was this book the first time you heard about him whenever we gave you the copy of this, or had you heard about it from some of his other stuff?
So Yes and no.
Okay. That's an interesting way to answer a binary question.
When we talked about the
Right. Yeah.
when we talked about it, I was like, no, I don't know anything about him. But as I started researching him so I could be prepared to be on here, I was familiar with him.
Yeah.
I had not read any of his books, but I had seen some of his videos. I have a couple other friends that are big fans and have been trying to get me to read his books for a while.
Oh, nice.
I had some familiarity with him.
That's cool. Like the first time we talked about interviewing him, this was several years ago when the book Person of Interest came out. My secretary is a huge consumer of Dateline, and he's Dateline's most featured cold case detective. And
I
so
found that out as I was researching him.
Yeah, so we were talking about some things, and I was like, yeah, this book came out, and it's this guy, and she's like, I was like, and he's a cold case detective, and she's like, let me see his picture. She's like, yeah, I see him all the time. Right. Yeah, like he's been on TV. He's been on TV. It's like, oh yeah, cool. So I had nothing from the Dateline thing, but we found out about him from like I said, from Professor Nancy Piercy. Is brilliant. The new book is called The Truth in True Crime. It is out on Zondervan. You can get it on Amazon. It's on some library apps right now. So if you're one of those like me and Danley, Josh, we look at the library app, get the audio versions, those kinds of things to just help with ease of life. It's out there, or you can get it direct from the publisher. Make sure that you go check out Jim's website, coldcasechristianity.com, where he makes a lot of the resources from this book available for free so that you can use it to teach your congregations, your small groups, those kinds of things. Josh, thanks for coming and hanging out, man.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Hopefully we will be doing a little bit more Rev and Rep as we're kind of revamping things and coming back. So make sure that you like, subscribe, ding the little bell, leave us a comment, and let us know whether or not you're happy we're back or whether you think we need to go away again. Either way,
I'm new here, so I don't
helps us in the algorithm.
Hurt my feelings right off the bat.
Yeah, you're not gonna hurt Jim's apparently. So you guys, y'all stay hard, keep jamming, and we'll see you.
This is J. Warner Wallace, and I just got done doing an episode with the Reverend and the Reprobate, which is a show you should never listen to. Why? Because it's basically being led by the most hated group in all of America, white heterosexual males. There's no point in listening to them, and I'm one of those as well. So just don't listen to any of us. Don't listen to any of us.